Hello and welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Choy. We begin with the fishing boat that capsized yesterday off the country's southern coast. The death toll from that accident rose to 10 today. The Jeju Coast Guard has confirmed 21 people were on board the vessel. 3 have been rescued, 8 are missing, and several others remain unaccounted for. The 9.8-ton boat named Dolphin lost contact at around 7:38 p.m. Saturday, about half an hour after it left Chuja Island north of Jeju for Haenam, Jeollanam-do province, and was found near Chuja Island at around 6:25 a.m. Sunday. It is believed that rolling waves caused the boat to flip over. More than 50 naval and Coast Guard vessels, including a Lynx helicopter, have been mobilized for the rescue effort. President Park Geun-hye has ordered the Public Safety and Security Minister to do everything possible and to continually update the families of the missing, the authorities, and the general public. In inter-Korean relations, officials from the two Koreas will hold working-level talks on Monday to iron out the details of a planned set of reunions for war-separated families. Seoul's Unification Ministry said Sunday the meeting will begin at 10 a.m. Monday on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. Up for discussion, the date, location, and scale of the events. While nothing has been set, the reunions are expected to take place in early or mid-October following the Chuseok holidays, the Korean harvest holiday, at North Korea's Mount Kumgang resort. The reunions will most likely be held in 2 rounds for 100 families from each side, the maximum number of people the resort can accommodate. South Korea is set to engage in a flurry of nuclear diplomacy following last week's summit with China. This week, South Korean officials will hold talks with their counterparts in China and the United States ahead of a possible rocket launch by Pyongyang next month. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea will engage in back-to-back nuclear diplomacy this week as part of ongoing efforts to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions. On Monday, South Korean officials in charge of North Korea affairs will meet with Chinese Deputy Nuclear Negotiator Xiao Chen in Seoul. It will be the first such meeting since last week's summit talks in Beijing. President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jinping had called for a swift resumption of meaningful 6-party nuclear talks. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia has been stalled for nearly 7 years. Separately, South Korea's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk is scheduled to travel to Washington in the latter half of the week for talks with his U.S. counterpart Sang Kim. He also plans to stop in New York to meet with representatives of the 15 UN Security Council member states. The flurry of nuclear diplomacy comes ahead of a possible rocket launch by Pyongyang next month. There is growing speculation that North Korea will fire a long-range missile sometime around October 10th to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party. The pressure on Pyongyang is expected to intensify when the Chinese leader meets with U.S. President Barack Obama at the end of this month. But while Seoul and Washington have called for China to play a more constructive role in bringing about change in North Korea, it remains to be seen how far Beijing is willing to go against its longtime ally. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea is joining the chorus of voices criticizing Japan for its wartime atrocities. Seoul-based Haenam news agency obtained the August issue of North Korea's English-language Pictorial Korea magazine, which contains an article and photos highlighting the heinous acts committed by Japan during its colonial rule of Korea. The graphic pictures show the beheading of a young man who appears no older than a grade schooler, piles of bodies of Koreans slaughtered by the Japanese, and soldiers harassing senior citizens. The article criticizes Japan for its war crimes, saying they must never be forgotten. Moving on to other stories, foreign investment banks and financial institutions are offering a bleak outlook for Korea in the third quarter. The negative forecasts are attributed to a slowdown in the country's exports, which have been on a continued streak of negative growth this year. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Korea's slowing exports are threatening its economic recovery, according to bleak third-quarter forecasts. Figures from the Korea Development Institute show that while Asia's fourth-largest economy posted a moderate increase in domestic consumption and investment in July from the month before, industrial production shrank over 3% from the previous year due to weak exports. Korea's outbound shipments fell nearly 15% in August from the year before, continuing an 8-month streak of negative growth, the fastest pace of decline in 6 years. The development is likely to hinder economic growth for the heavily export-dependent economy. The slowdown is attributed to weaker demand from China and other major emerging markets. Foreign investment banks have already lowered their third-quarter growth forecast for China to an average of 6.9%, the lowest since 2009. As China is a primary destination for the largest chunk of Korea's exports, the slowdown has also tugged on Korea's economic growth outlook. Already, the Australia and New Zealand banking group has predicted that the Korean economy will expand less than 2% in the third and fourth quarters if the downward trend continues this month. Moody's Credit Rating Institute is predicting 2.1% growth in the third quarter, while research firm HIS Economics forecasts a 2% expansion. Experts say that the downward trend will continue for some time, given the possible risks posed by external factors, such as a possible rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve and the instability in global financial markets. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's top economic official says there can be no more compromises on the proposed labor reform system that would gradually cut the wages of employees nearing retirement in order to boost the youth employment rate. Speaking to reporters at the G20 finance ministers meeting in Ankara, Turkey, Korea's finance minister said that the government has done enough to work out a compromise between labor and management and that it is time for the labor group to make a decision. Meanwhile, regarding the possibility of a U.S. rate hike, Choi Kyung-hwan said it is incorrect to assume that countries including Korea should increase their rates just because the Federal Reserve does. Choi added that he had the impression that the U.S. would increase its rate slowly and carefully after a conversation with Fed Vice Chairman Stanley Fischer. The head of the International Monetary Fund has urged the world's largest economies to move ahead with economic overhauls as global growth outlook sours and market turmoil rocks emerging markets. After a meeting with top finance officials from G20 nations on Saturday, IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde said a concerted policy effort is needed to address these challenges, including continued accommodative monetary policy in advanced economies, growth-friendly fiscal policies, and structural reforms. She added that more implementation is urgently needed as growth, trade, and investment are too low while unemployment still too high. Although G20 countries pledged last year to boost the global economy by 2 percentage points of global GDP over 5 years by overhauling their economies, they fell short of reaching those goals. Thousands of migrants arrived in Austria and Germany after the two nations opened their borders on Saturday to exhausted refugees from the east. Austrians greeted the arriving migrants with applause, welcome signs, clothing, food, and water. Thousands more will arrive from Hungary after Budapest eased restrictions on their travel, while Austrian authorities set no limits on the numbers of people crossing into the country. The Hungarian government has vowed tighter border controls and is considering troop deployment. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the country can cope with the influx of newcomers without raising taxes or jeopardizing its budget. She is also set to hold talks with her coalition partners as there are few signs of a coordinated EU response to the migrant crisis. Nearly a quarter of all fruit and vegetable crops every year are lost to food spoilage during the distribution process. But now, researchers from Korea have found a way to stop the rot using sound. For more on this brilliant discovery, we turn to our Park Se-young.
Tomatoes begin to spoil about 10 days after harvest, which decreases their value and causes tomato farmers losses of up to 20% of their crop during the handling process. But now, a research team from Korea has developed a way to delay the ripening of harvested tomatoes by exposing them to sound. Researchers expose green tomatoes to varying sound frequencies for 6 hours a day for 12 days. The result was a 35% decline in the production of ethylene, a ripening hormone, and a 33% drop in respiration volume. The ripening of fruit is directly related to ethylene production and increased respiration rate. The treated tomatoes average a delay in ripening of 3 to 4 days compared to those left untreated. Of the sound frequencies tested, 1 kHz produced the best result, yielding a 40% delay in ripening. The sound wave treatment has no side effects and is easy to execute. Applying this technology to other fruits and vegetables is expected to cut annual losses by over $2.5 billion.
This low-cost treatment simply requires speakers and a sound wave program. Anyone can use it, even those unfamiliar with sound waves.
The Rural Development Administration has applied for a patent for the treatment, with plans to distribute the technology to both farms and retailers. The study was also published in the online version of the international journal Post-Harvest Biology and Technology. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
And now a quick look at the weather before we go. Clear skies and warm temperatures await Koreans in most parts of the nation tomorrow morning, with the mercury not expected to rise above 29 during the day. But cooler weather is on the way, with temperatures plummeting by up to 10 degrees tomorrow night. Meanwhile, it looks like rescuers working in the Chuja Island area where the boat Dolphin capsized will need to wrap up their operations quickly tomorrow, as wind speeds could climb up to 14 meters per second later in that day. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the weather conditions outside of Korea around the world. And that's all from us for now. Do join us for more at 10 p.m. Korea time. Thank you for watching.